It's no secret that Star Wars creator George Lucas was considering making a sequel trilogy for some now. Back in the 80s, Mark Hamill even did an interview stating Lucas's early plans for what episodes 7, 8, and 9 would entail. Well, those movies all exist now, with The Rise of Skywalker due December 2019, but they look very different than what George had in mind. Let's break down just how different. Star Wars is one of the most popular and beloved movie franchises in existence. No matter what the franchise delivers, whether it be good, bad, or divisive, there is still something for fans to cherish and hold on to. When he first started pitching the movie, however, no one seemed particularly interested in George Lucas's wacky space soap opera. After the first 3 movies came out in the late 70s and early 80s, Lucas took a break from the franchise. But fans knew with the re-release of the original film before the debut of The Empire Strikes Back that there would be more Star Wars to come thanks to the addition of Episode 4, A New Hope. This confirmed that while this was the first film in the franchise, it wasn't the first film in the timeline, and there would be more content to come in due time. It was the late 90s when Star Wars struck back in the form of the prequels. For years, the prequels were the topic of ridicule and a lot of hate from the fans. An over-reliance on CGI, poor acting, and bizarre story choices didn't gel well with the fans of the original films. Only recently have the prequels started gaining some attention and praise from fans, but the whole ordeal with the prequels likely soured George's relationship with his own product, and in the end, he ended up selling Lucasfilm to one of the biggest companies on the planet, Disney. In 2012, Lucas gave the Mouse House the rights to the Star Wars property, Indiana Jones, and anything else that was controlled under the Lucasfilm banner for a bargain of $2.2 billion in cash, and $1.855 in stock. Not exactly small change, but considering the profits on the films alone, never mind merchandise, and the results speak for themselves. In his recent autobiography, The Ride of a Lifetime, Disney CEO Bob Iger spoke candidly about the Star Wars acquisition and the fallout of not working with George in any capacity on the next 3 installments of the Skywalker trilogy. One of the first things Disney announced was that they were going to make a brand new Star Wars trilogy. As you might remember, fan fever went into overdrive from that point on. But while Disney purchased the rights to Star Wars, it wasn't the only thing they bought from George Lucas that day. As part of the deal, Disney also acquired the treatments for George Lucas's drafts for a sequel trilogy. Disney's Alan Horn and Bob Iger read those scripts and decided it was probably for the best to buy them, just in case, but told Lucas that they were not contractually obligated to use any material from said script. Lucas was made aware of this and, according to Iger, was okay with this revelation, but it was still difficult for him to accept it as a possibility down the line. As a further safety net, they brought Lucas in as a creative consultant to help Disney steer Star Wars in the right direction. But just like the scripts, Disney was under no legal obligation to adhere to what Lucas had to say. But it wasn't long before the dream of George Lucas, working on his own treatments for the future of Star Wars, began to shatter. Disney, of course, did not go with Lucas's treatments, and he offered to creative input to the sequel trilogy. Bob Iger, Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, and original Force Awakens writer Michael Arndt had a sit-down with Lucas at Skywalker Ranch to talk about the plot of the upcoming and highly anticipated film. It was here that Lucas learned that the new regime would not be using any of his material. It was this act that caused George Lucas to feel betrayed, as Iger stated in his biography, as he thought that the Disney purchase of his treatments was an unspoken promise of sorts to use some or all of his material. In fact, his only contribution to Star Wars so far has been a brief moment in the Solo film. From there, Lucas has been pretty candid and blunt about his dislike of the sequel trilogy thus far. But if he knew he was not legally going to see any of his works come to light, why did he bother selling the property? Lucas has gone as far as to call Disney the white slavers in an interview with Charlie Rose, alluding to them taking something and destroying it but never finished his sentence. But his feelings are stemmed from the fact that they altered the master plan. He stated that Disney wanted to make something for the fans, which is exactly what Abrams and Kennedy wanted to do with The Force Awakens. After a 10-year wait and coming off the rocky response of the prequels, they wanted to make a familiar film experience that would feel like Star Wars by essentially using all of the expected elements and tropes in order to lure the fans back in and tell them that yes, this is Star Wars, as opposed to trying something new. No matter what one can say about the prequels, we can at least agree that they are very different from the original films, and at least tried something different aesthetically and narratively. One of the biggest elements George Lucas wanted to explore in his version of the sequel trilogy would have been further exploration of midi-chlorians. Yes, we know that word is a touchy subject among many fans, but did it have to be? In the original films, the Force was an unseen and unexplained entity that mysteriously linked all life together, and those strong with the Force could manipulate it in varying ways. It was very spiritual, cosmic, and even magical to a younger eyes. The prequels sort of derailed that notion by introducing midi-chlorians to the conversation and greatly expanding on what they mean to a galaxy far, far away. Lucas broke down his initial plans to his friend and fellow filmmaker James Cameron during the TV series James Cameron's Story of Science Fiction. Lucas had this to say on the show, quote, "The next 3 Star Wars films were going to get into a microbiotic world. There's this world of creatures that operate differently than we do. I call them the Whills, and the Whills are the ones who actually control the universe. They feed off the Force. What are the Whills, you may be asking? They are vehicles for the Whills to travel around in, and the conduit is the midi-chlorians. The midi-chlorians are the ones that communicate with the Whills. The Whills, in a general sense, they are the Force. You may remember that Chirrut and Buzz from Rogue One were called Guardians of the Whills. The Whills themselves were actually created by George Lucas back during the very first Star Wars film, and were included in the novelization of that movie by including a passage from the so-called Journal of the Whills. The Whills themselves were immortal beings that formed an order that controlled basically everything through the Force. In other words, we may call them the gods of the Star Wars universe, and that all life in the galaxy is simply conduits, or vehicles as Lucas stated, for the Whills to operate. The conduit for the Whills was, of course, the midi-chlorians, and they communicated with the Whills, who were essentially the Force. Lucas would even touch on the reception of midi-chlorians in the prequels, stating, "Everybody hated it in Phantom Menace when we started talking about midi-chlorians." There's a whole aspect of that movie that is about symbiotic relationships, to make you look and see that we aren't the boss, that there is an ecosystem there. Interestingly enough, Lucas full-on knew how they were received, yet wanted to power through and make a whole trilogy about the cosmic force that would bind everything together and wasn't about to change his plans for anyone. It was his vision, and that's what he wanted to do. James Cameron, diplomatically enough, tossed his 2 cents into an interview stating, "I don't want to say too much about the film because I also have a lot of respect for J.J. Abrams. I have to say that I felt that George's group of 6 films had more innovative visual imagination. This film was more of a retrenchment to things you had seen before and characters you had seen before, and it took a few baby steps forward with new characters." Of course, in the middle of all this cosmic force adventuring, there was still going to be further adventures of Luke Skywalker and company. Lucas's original plans would involve a 30 to 40-year-old Luke Skywalker broadening his understanding of the Force. He would have been a more central character, if not the central character of the trilogy, and as such, wouldn't have been hiding in exile for almost the entirety of the first act of the trilogy, which was the case with The Force Awakens. By Episode 9, he would have begun training Princess Leia. Once he had trained her, then Luke was set to die by the end of the 9th film. George's plan directly contradicts the old expanded universe. So it seems that no matter what, a sequel trilogy would have wiped the slate clean of the old EU. There would have been many other changes to Luke's story, such as him having a romantic partner. This is in line with the EU, and we have to wonder if George wanted to bring Mara Jade to the big screen at some point, as she was one of the most popular characters to come out of the books at that point in time. Interestingly, Lucas wanted to include Palpatine in his version of Episode 9, and J.J. Abrams did meet up with George Lucas before he began writing his version of the script after Colin Trevorrow left the project. So does this mean Palpatine was always in the cards and JJ wanted to get George's advice on how to handle that particular aspect of the story? It's possible. One thing that is for sure consistent is the idea of Luke being a mentor in the sequel trilogy, the Obi-Wan Kenobi character, as evident by Hamill's own words in that interview we played earlier on in this video. So while we may have gotten much more Luke, he may not have been the lead character as he was passing that torch on to a new hero. That has come to pass, but not per se in the way Lucas envisioned. One has to wonder what Lucasfilm is thinking these days with their boss, Uncle Bob, releasing this tell-all book months before the release of The Rise of Skywalker, the film that may make or break the sequel trilogy for many fans. There's a lot riding on it to win over fans yet again after the divisiveness of The Last Jedi and the lukewarm reception of Solo. Having the fans getting angry at Disney and defending George, which is happening online, make no doubt about that, seems like something that should have happened after The Rise of Skywalker released. As such, that information is out there now, and we have to wonder if it has hurt Star Wars' reputation with Disney, and how that will affect the upcoming film's reception with fans. Many fans have since accepted the prequel films. They have bad acting, sure, but for many fans, they now see that the prequels tried something different, which is what George intended to do. Only time will tell what Episode 9 offers to the narrative. Do you prefer the idea of a cosmic force trilogy that explored the bigger picture, midi-chlorians and all? Or is the more accessible narrative with Rey and Kylo Ren the better option at the end of the day? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in your playlist. Thanks for watching!